Is there an argument that that the Liberals have violated Section 119 of the Criminal Code?
If any of them, others who have not switched, have been approached and offered anything, that offer is a bribe. What Carney's indicating is he's power mad.
Tyranny, democracy, something in between. That's the confusing part about Canada's system. We elect our members of parliament, but our prime minister, whom we don't even choose, ends up appointing the Crown's representative here in Canada, as well as virtually everybody in the Senate. Here to talk about, does it make sense? Does it not make sense? And what do we do about it? Is Duff Conacher from Democracy Watch. Duff, thanks for coming back to Northern Perspective.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So we just saw the announcement of Mark Carney appointing Louise Arbour as the next Governor General. Some are saying that this is a good thing based on her resume. Many people are saying that this is concerning just based on the fact that she's a Liberal. But I think the more important question is whether she's partisan or not, does it really matter? Because the Governor General doesn't really have a significant impact on our government system, maybe unlike it was supposed to when it was originally conceived.
Yes, and what people should realize, as Mark Carney himself said when making the appointment, is that the Governor General is the guardian of our constitutional order of responsible government to ensure that the government has the confidence of the House. So the Governor General really decides what a vote of confidence is. Post-election, who gets the chance to govern first, whether a coalition of opposition parties, if it was a minority government, should have a chance to govern if the speech from the throne's voted down. What else is a vote of confidence other than a speech from the throne and a budget? There's no clarity in our system. Prorogations, snap elections, all of these things are in the Governor General's hands. And the Governor General is just one of many guardians of democracy. All the officers of Parliament that watch over access to information, transparency, ethics, lobbying, spending, elections. And then you have the Senate, who's there supposed to be a check on the House. And the Prime Minister handpicks all of them through secretive partisan processes. And it's dangerously undemocratic. And just one of the many unchecked powers of our Prime Minister, who, if people don't know, several studies have shown Canada's Prime Minister and our premiers are the most powerful, have the most unchecked powers of any democratically elected leaders in the world.
And I've looked into that as well and heard the same thing. Some people would say, well, how is that possible, Duff? Because the United States, the president is regarded as the most powerful man in the world, and he can use executive orders and he can make appointments and all of these things. So how could the Prime Minister of Canada possibly have more power than the President of the United States?
Yeah, and very easily, first of all, an elected Senate in the U.S. So those senators can come from a party that is not the same party as the president's. And if the opposition party has a majority in the Senate, that's a really effective check on the president. Another appointment, another guardian of our constitutional order are our Supreme Court justices. In the U.S., the president has to put nominees before a Senate committee, and the Senate committee can reject the nominee. In Canada, the Prime Minister handpicks the person. Another sham process where they claim there's an independent advisory board, but all the members are chosen by the Prime Minister for that advisory board, so they're not independent. If you depend on someone for your job or your position, you're not independent. You're dependent on them. And the Prime Minister, like with the Governor General, where there was an advisory board under Harper and Trudeau, and with the Senate, where there's advisory board, the Prime Minister can disregard the nominees that the advisory boards put forward because they're just advisory. And so the Prime Minister can then say, thank you for your input, but I'm choosing another person. So, and again, none of these advisory boards are independent. They're all handpicked people, handpicked by the prime minister's office. So these are partisan political processes that allow for patronage and cronyism. And the U.S. does not have any of those systems. All of their guardians of democracy are independent of the president. And that's the same across the world with democratically elected leaders. The members of the legislature are much more independent. Like in Britain, MPs are much more independent than our MPs are, have much more power over their party leaders. And then on down through judicial, Senate, or equivalent appointments, and also the appointments of the watchdogs, the officers of parliament that watch over things like transparency, ethics, lobbying, elections, and spending.
Now, when our system was conceived, it was, as everybody knows, based on the Westminster system. The whole point of having the Governor General and the Senate and the House of Commons was to act as that check and balance on power. Do you think that it made more sense at that time because the words honor and duty and serve meant something potentially a lot different than it does today, where today it seems that politicians are interested in loopholes and, as you say, words like patronage and party loyalty and things like that. Do you think that the system was actually fit for the time, and is that why there seems to be such a disconnect now, because those words don't seem to mean a lot with the politicians these days?
I don't really think there is a good old days, except in the terms of the power of MPs. MPs did have more power before the change was made to the federal election law and the election laws in the provinces that gave the party leader the power to decide whether someone will be able to run in the next election, and essentially confirming people as election candidates for the party. And once that change was made in the mid 70s, ever since it's been an axe held over each MP's head. Essentially, they know that the party leader could end their career by just not allowing them to be the candidate the next time around. And but in terms of other things like the Senate, the Governor General, I mean, the Governor General was initially all powerful, essentially consulted with uh, people who were initially appointed and then elected in very flawed elections where only white men who owned property could vote. So the Governor General had much more power. Since the Governor General has been somewhat Canadianized since the 50s, nothing's been done to check that power of calling snap elections, shutting down Parliament through prorogations whenever you want, and all these other key areas. Really, there's 8 key rules that are missing that have been written down in Britain and New Zealand and Australia, but here they're unwritten, about what a vote of confidence is, and what happens if there's a vote of non-confidence in the government of the day in a minority parliament situation or even a majority parliament situation. What the power is in terms of, as I mentioned, snap elections, prorogations, and things like that. So I don't think there was a good old days. I don't think the loopholes are being exploited or abused that much more than they ever have been. If you look at past governments, I think it is a bit of illusion that somehow things were better in the past.
So, the last time that the Governor General, I would say arguably, exercised the power of the office is probably, going back to the King Byng affair, where it almost caused a constitutional crisis, where Governor General Byng refused, or tried to refuse, to dissolve Parliament on the advice of the Prime Minister way back in the early 1900s. And we haven't really seen anything since. So, when I look at this from a process perspective, I evaluate a process and the approvals in that in that the value of the approval is based on the amount of times that that approval is denied. So if you look at the value of the governor general's office based on the amount of times that that power has been used to check the power of the executive branch and the prime minister, we've seen it essentially once in confederation. Some people will argue that there was a somewhat muddy situation, with Harper, and that the governor general said, well, yeah, sure, you can prorogue parliament, but you'll have to have a confidence vote after, that sort of thing. But we haven't really seen an actual check in power since then. So I guess the natural question arises, do we even need a governor general in Canada anymore? And are we getting the value for the millions of dollars that we actually spend for this person to have this position?
Yes, and so some people say, oh, useless position, get rid of it. The problem is that that requires constitutional agreement across the country. What do you do about the governor general? Well, take it out of the prime minister's hands. Our proposal is, again, because the governor general chooses the lieutenant governors on the advice of the prime minister, which is quite a power over the provinces. What should happen is a fully independent committee with no politicians on it from any party should do a merit-based public search for qualified candidates for governor general. You do want someone like Louise Arbour, who is, in terms of her experience as a lawyer, because the governor general makes legal rulings. And then they would come up with a very short list of 3 people. And then you have party leaders from all the legislatures across the country, by a ranked ballot, choose who the governor general would be. And then in each province, the parties recognized in each legislature should also have an independent committee search for the lieutenant governor, again, who's qualified, merit-based public search, come up with a short list, and then the party leaders there would vote on and choosing the lieutenant governor. That makes the person nonpartisan and would make the person have democratic legitimacy. And then if they have written rules that they can enforce and point to, they would actually be able to say no to the prime minister. And the lieutenant governors, you need written rules in all the provincial legislatures. And so the lieutenant governors would also be able to say, no, that's an illegal prorogation. Oh, that's an illegal snap election call. Oh, you just did lose confidence in the House because here's what clearly happened, and it was a vote of non-confidence. And instead, we have no rules. They're unwritten, which means no rules, because everyone can point to them and say, no, it says this, no, it says that, and they're pointing to ether. And we have these hand-picked people who the ruling party chooses, and they can say, oh, I'm going to be independent-minded, but they owe their job to one person. And they're essentially saying, I'm not human, because if someone gives you a job, you owe them. And if you think you don't, then you're not a human, because tests have been done by psychologists worldwide and found that the number one way to influence someone is to give them a gift or do them a favor. And handing you a nice, cushy job that's high paying is quite a favor. And so it would affect how you judge the prime minister or premier's actions because you've been handed the job by them, essentially. So that's a simple solution, and not one word of the Constitution has to be changed. This could be done tomorrow.
Well, and that is the interesting thing, and that's where Canadians should understand is there's different constitutional pathways and rules around different constitutional amendments. So I think a lot of people are familiar with the 750 rule, 7 provinces and 50%, but they should know, and this is what you're referring to, that to make changes regarding any of the Queen's or the King's involvement in Canada, you actually do have to have that 100% participation and agreement from the 10 provinces. And it's also interesting because the Governor General is supposed to be, if we look at really the intent of it, it's supposed to be the King's or the Crown's representative in Canada. So it's almost incongruent that the King and the Crown doesn't actually pick who that is. So we're already kind of violating the spirit of that in the first place.
Yes, but I don't think most Canadians would want to return to a system.
Agreed.
Yeah, a queen or king is picking the person. And so,
Agreed.
and
My
we
point
should
was that we're
democratize.
not even doing it right in the first place
Yes, that's
if we were to go there. But um, the second point is to, and this goes to your point, is that so the prime minister, who's supposed to pick the watchdog that looks after him and the government, um, how does that make sense that you're actually picking, you're almost the inmate picking who your jail guard is, and that doesn't make any sense. So
right.
it's an interesting proposal.
Yeah, there's another analogy. You shouldn't be able to choose your own judge, right? Everyone would choose someone that would favor them. And that's what prime ministers do, and premiers as well, when they're choosing these other watchdogs, the officers of parliament, that watch over mostly the government in terms of transparency and spending, and ethics and lobbying, and of course running elections. And some of those, there does have to be a vote in the House to approve them. But if you have a majority, that vote's automatic again, because the ruling party leaders, including the prime minister and the premiers provincially, have control over the members of their caucus. And so just because the majority of the House has approved the head of Elections Canada or the Information Commissioner or the Lobbying Commissioner, it's pretty meaningless in a majority government. It's not, again, a check on the prime minister's power that's in any way effective. And so for all those uh, uh, appointments, and also for the Senate, again, an independent committee with no politicians on it, fully independent. People cannot have ties to any party, not donors. There are these people out there who are be willing to serve in these positions, but they're never chosen because every ruling party wants to stack it with their own loyalists or people who are neutral, and then have them do a public merit-based search for all of these key guardians, come up with a short list, and then have a multi-party committee make the final choice. And it's very important, the governor general and all these other positions. Right now, people can quite justifiably say the guardians of our democracy are tainted by partisanship to favor the ruling party. And these are people enforcing laws. The head of the RCMP, also a person who is chosen, handpicked by the prime minister, as is every deputy commissioner and the head of every division of the RCMP, and they all serve at the pleasure of the prime minister. So even with our actual police force, we do not have an independent police force that's independent from the prime minister and the federal cabinet. And provincially, the premiers do the same. They choose the heads of their provincial police forces. Very, very dangerous to have law enforcement positions handpicked by politicians. That means you don't get fair law enforcement. And Carney, I think, it knows this and was trying to push back on it when he appointed Louise Arbour. And he said, she's always been very focused on upholding the rule of law, which means that the law applies to everybody, even the most powerful. And so she's going to somehow check Carney because she's always done that. But he's handing her the job. And so it's quite justifiable for everyone to say, oh, you've chosen a partisan, she's tainted as a result. And that should not be no one should be able to say that. As long as you can say that, we don't have a rule of law. And if you don't have a rule of law, you don't have democracy. Because the standard is, according to the Supreme Court of Canada, several rulings, the standard is, can the public have confidence not only in the actual integrity of the system of law enforcement, but that it appears to have integrity?
Well, and there's a debate that's been going on for years now about the Senate and should senators be appointed or elected. And there's a couple of ideas that have come to mind for me. Is, if you are going to stick with an appointed Senate, then perhaps you arrange the Senate after every election based on the percentage of representation in the House by the different parties, and then the different party leaders may get to pick the percentage of senators that would sit in the House. That's one way to prevent the Senate from becoming like it is, almost entirely picked by one party. Another option is to have a cycle through, so the actual parties that are registered, they get to continuously pick the next senator. So regardless of who's in power, maybe the NDP gets to pick one, maybe the Conservatives get to pick one, and that way you're not relying on extreme partisanship, and it just gets constantly rotated through. The other aspect of that is you move to an elected Senate, and every time you have a general election, and then that aligns us more with the U.S. system, and senators get elected every election. So, what do you think is going to be the the best of the worst in terms of how we solve the Senate issue?
Well, again, you have the difficulty of the Constitution having to be changed if you're going to change the process to something like an election, or what Democracy Watch favors, which is abolition, because I don't think the Senate will ever be reformed enough to be useful. And it's redundant. And you could add more regional balance to the House by adding more seats outside of central Canada. And free MPs, as we've talked about, free MPs are under the control of party leaders. They could be freed. And then they would be a check on the government in the way that they're not now, because they all know that their career could be ended by their party leader. But both of those, elected Senate or abolition, would require constitutional change, and it's just so unlikely to happen. So then you return to what you had suggested initially, some agreement that the appointment system will change so that the opposition parties either directly get to appoint people, or there's an agreement that there'll be some proportionality based on what the makeup of the House is, or you just change to what I talked about generally as our Democracy Watch's proposal, which is a fully independent committee, does a public merit-based search for qualified candidates, and then puts a short list to an all-party committee. And that's how you get senators appointed. And that can be done, any kind of those appointment changes. It's all in the hands of the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister can delegate that without any constitutional change in any way the Prime Minister wants. So Prime Minister Harper initially, and then Trudeau changed it slightly, but essentially the same thing, said, I'm setting up an independent advisory board to come up with nominees for the Senate. The boards were not independent. All the members were chosen by the Prime Minister under both Harper and Trudeau. And if you're dependent on Prime Minister for your position, you're not independent of the Prime Minister, and they could both disregard any of the nominees put forward and appoint whomever they wanted. So it was a charade. It was a facade to say somehow I'm checking my power to appoint whomever I want, when in effect there was no check at all. In fact, if the advisory boards would put forward a secret list of nominees, and if the Prime Minister appointed someone off of that list, neither the Prime Minister nor the advisory board was allowed to say that the Prime Minister had done that. So we wouldn't even know. There wasn't even transparency that the Prime Minister was ignoring the board's recommendations. And then what just yesterday Carney said, he was asked late yesterday afternoon, and he said, I'm going to continue using the advisory board that Trudeau set up. But right now there's like 24 members of the board have not been appointed because there's different boards for each province. There's currently 9 vacant Senate seats, and another 6 will be empty by the end of the year. And Carney is saying, I'm going to use the same advisory board, but in effect doesn't exist because there's 24 people who need to be appointed to the advisory boards, and then the senators appointed. So we'll see what he does. But he was essentially indicating, I'm going to use the same old partisan process. So the appointment of the Governor General, and we'll see what he does with the Supreme Court appointment that's coming up. Again, claiming that we have an independent advisory board, but he hasn't named the members. It's not going to be independent because Carney's going to choose all the members. And then with these Senate appointments, what Carney's indicating is he's power mad. Really, he is not even, didn't even use an advisory board for the Governor General. Handpicked straight out of the PMO. Probably going to do the same, really, with the Supreme Court position and the Senate appointments. And he already, got people to cross the floor, and he did reward some of them, whether the rewards were offered before they crossed. One of them was named an advisor, another was taken on a trip that he never would have been taken on if he was just a backbench MP for the Liberals. And just consolidating his power. He's got this cabal of mostly old white guys around him, and he's consolidating his power and just abusing all the powers that he can abuse because our system is so weak.
Is there an argument that that the Liberals have violated Section 119 of the Criminal Code, which is the bribery aspect of this and this, or is that going to be very difficult to prove in this case?
In the floor crossings?
Yeah.
Well, if any conservative MP or opposition MP, because again, they've approached NDPers as well. Obviously, one NDP MP has switched over. If any of them, others who have not switched, have been approached and offered anything, I don't know why they haven't gone public already, because that offer is a bribe and is a crime. With the ones that switched, they all said, I wasn't offered anything. One of them, there was spending in the Chris Donchermas, there was spending in his riding. Second one was made a special advisor to the prime minister. Third one was taken on a trip to China, which he never would have been invited on as a Liberal MP. And but again, you'd have to, who's going to blow the whistle on them? Not certainly anyone from the Liberals who might have offered them those things, and not themselves, because you can't accept a bribe either. It's illegal both to offer and accept it. So it really is up to others who may be approached, that if they have evidence of that the approach offered any kind of benefit or advantage, doesn't have to be money, or even promised it. It doesn't actually have to be delivered. They should be going to the police. And otherwise, though,
the police that Mark Carney appointed,
the RCMP commissioner, yeah, I would go to a local police force actually and put it in their hands. I would not put anything to do with the federal cabinet in the RCMP's hands. They've rolled over again and again and again, as we showed very clearly in the SNC-Lavalin scandal. Took us 2 years to dig out the documents, but it showed the RCMP rolled over and let them off. Completely unjust.
And the Aga Khan scandal.
The Aga Khan scandal, and then with 13 lobbyists through the Liberal years in power that the RCMP let off, even though the lobbying commissioner believed that they had violated the law. And that's something we just released a couple of months ago. And so, no, the RCMP has shown again and again they are incapable of enforcing anti-corruption laws. And not surprisingly, because they're, again, commissioner, deputy commissioners, the heads of every division of the RCMP, handpicked by the prime minister and serving at the prime minister's pleasure. Prime minister can fire them at any time for any reason. We do not have an independent federal police force.
This is the challenge that we have in Canada, and some people think that it's too far gone, but it's never too far gone as long as there's people that are willing to fight for this. And that's what Democracy Watch has been doing for decades and will continue to do. You don't plan on stopping this work anytime soon, do you, Duff?
No, we have much more to do. There's 100 loopholes in every single jurisdiction in Canada at the municipal, provincial, territorial, and federal level that effectively allow everyone in politics to be dishonest, unethical, secretive, make unrepresentative decisions, waste the public's money, and get away with wrongdoing. And so we're trying to close all those 100 loopholes for as long as it takes.